My in-laws brought a realtor to my house. We're selling this dump, mother-in-law announced. Widows like you should rent forever. Father-in-law laughed. Pack your trash. They had no idea whose name was on the deed, or what I'd do with theirs. The realtor was already measuring my living room when I came downstairs. I'd heard voices, 3 of them, familiar in the way that makes your stomach clench before your brain catches up. I stood on the landing for a moment, watching through the banister slats like I used to watch my parents fight when I was 7. Same feeling, same helplessness. Except I wasn't 7 anymore, and this was my house. The bones are decent, the realtor was saying. She had one of those extendable measuring tapes, the kind that makes a satisfying snap when it retracts. But the finishes are dated. We're looking at a full gut renovation to get top dollar. Whatever it takes, my mother-in-law said. She was standing in the center of my living room, the room where I'd nursed my husband through his final months, where I'd held his hand while the hospice nurse checked his vitals, where I'd slept on the couch for 6 weeks because I couldn't bear to be more than 10 feet away from him. She was standing there in her cream-colored blazer and her tasteful gold jewelry, looking at my walls like they had personally offended her. We'll need to clear out all this clutter, my father-in-law added. He gestured vaguely at my bookshelves, my photographs, the small ceramic vase Daniel had bought me in Portugal on our honeymoon. Get it staged properly, modern, buyers want clean lines. I came down the last 3 steps. My bare feet made no sound on the hardwood. Excuse me, I said. 3 heads turned. The realtor looked momentarily confused. She had the expression of someone who'd been told the house was empty. My in-laws looked at me the way they always had, like I was a stain that hadn't quite come out in the wash. Oh, Patricia said. You're home. She said it like I was the intruder, like I'd wandered into someone else's space and needed to be redirected, gently, back to wherever I belonged. I live here, I said. Richard laughed. Not a real laugh, that performative thing he did when he wanted to signal that someone was being ridiculous without having to explain why. He'd been doing it to me for 12 years. It still made my jaw tighten. Well, he said, not for much longer. I should tell you about the house. It's a 1920s craftsman on a corner lot in one of those neighborhoods that used to be working class and is now very much not. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a finished basement, and a backyard with a Japanese maple that turns the color of fire every October. The kitchen has original built-in cabinets. The porch wraps around 2 sides. The floors creak in places, and the windows stick in summer, and there's a draft in the upstairs bathroom that I've never been able to fix. Daniel and I found it 11 years ago. Back when the neighborhood was still transitioning and you could buy a house like this without selling your soul. We were 28 and 29, newly married, still young enough to think that stripping wallpaper at midnight counted as romance. We spent our first summer scraping and painting and arguing about tile samples. We spent our first winter huddled around the fireplace because the heating system was older than both of us combined, and we couldn't afford to replace it yet. It was never Patricia and Richard's idea of a suitable home. The neighborhood, Patricia had said, the first time she visited. She'd looked out the window at the street, at the mix of houses, some restored, some still waiting, some with gardens that had gone wild. It's very eclectic. We like it, Daniel had said. Patricia had that way of making a single sound carry an entire judgment. Well, it's a starter home. Except it wasn't. It was our home. And we stayed. We stayed when the neighborhood gentrified around us and our property taxes tripled. We stayed when Patricia offered to help us upgrade to something more appropriate. We stayed when Daniel got sick, and we stayed when he got sicker, and I stayed when he was gone. The house was mine now, had been for 14 months, and I had never once invited my in-laws inside during that time. I don't understand, I said, keeping my voice even. What are you doing here? The realtor, her name tag said Jennifer Hale, Coldwell Banker, looked between me and my in-laws with the expression of someone who has realized they've walked into something more complicated than a property listing. Mrs. Thorne, she said tentatively. Ms. Brennan, I corrected. I'd gone back to my maiden name 6 months after the funeral. Another thing Patricia had opinions about. And yes, I'm the homeowner. Oh. Jennifer's measuring tape retracted with a snap. I was told, I understood the property was being listed by the estate. There is no estate, I said. My husband passed away over a year ago. The house was in my name, it still is. Jennifer looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at Richard. Richard made that laughing sound again. "Sweetheart," he said, and the word was a dismissal. "You don't need to be embarrassed. We know finances aren't your strong suit. Daniel always handled the money. We understand you're probably confused about how all this works." "I'm not confused. The mortgage, the taxes, the insurance." Patricia ticked items off on her manicured fingers. "It's a lot for someone in your position. Widows like you should really be renting. Something modest, something you can manage." Widows like me. I let that phrase sit in the air between us. Widows like me, like I was a category, a type. Like the 14 months of grief and adjustment and learning to sleep in the center of the bed had reduced me to a demographic. "Patricia," I said, "I need you to leave. Now let's not be dramatic." She moved toward me, and I saw Jennifer edge toward the front door, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. "We're trying to help you. You've been rattling around in this old place for over a year now, and frankly, it's not healthy. The house is too big for one person, too much maintenance, too many memories." "Those are my memories." "Exactly." She said it like I'd made her point for her. "You need a fresh start, and we need—" She stopped herself, recalibrated. "We think it would be best for everyone if we liquidated this asset and divided the proceeds appropriately." There it was I'd known, of course. I'd known from the moment I came down the stairs, but hearing her say it, liquidated this asset, made something shift in my chest. Not surprise, something colder, something that had been building for 12 years and was only now finding its shape. "Divided the proceeds," I repeated. "Daniel was our son." Richard's voice had that tone of wounded dignity he used when he wanted to seem reasonable while being anything but. "Whatever he left behind, whatever he accumulated during his marriage, half of that should rightfully come to us." "He didn't leave anything behind. He left it to me." "A technicality. It's called a will. Wills can be contested." Patricia's voice was smooth, confident. She'd practiced this speech, I realized. Probably in the car on the way over. Probably with a lawyer who'd told her exactly what to say. When there are questions about undue influence, about capacity, about a spouse who may have taken advantage of a dying man, get out. The courts are very sympathetic to grieving parents who, "Get out of my house." Jennifer had already made it to the porch. I heard her car start in the driveway. Smart woman. I wished I could follow her. Patricia blinked at me. In 12 years, I had never raised my voice to her. I had smiled and nodded and let Daniel run interference. I had swallowed every slight, every condescending remark, every implication that I wasn't good enough for her son. I had done it because I loved him. And he loved them despite everything, and I didn't want to be the reason for a rift I couldn't repair. But Daniel was gone, and I was done swallowing. "This is our family home," Patricia said, recovering quickly. Her voice had gone cold. "Daniel grew up knowing this property would appreciate. He invested in it with the understanding that Daniel never lived here as a child. You lived in Westchester. This house was purchased 3 years after we got married with money we saved together. It was in my name because my credit was better. It has been in my name for 11 years. There is no family claim. There is no estate dispute. There is only you, in my living room, without my permission, trying to take something that does not belong to you." Silence. Richard's face had gone an interesting shade of red. Patricia's jaw was tight, and I could see her recalculating, searching for a new angle of attack. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer," she said finally. "I look forward to it. You think you're clever." She picked up her handbag from my couch, where Daniel used to fall asleep watching documentaries, where I still found his reading glasses sometimes in the cushions. "You think you've won something, but we know people, Margaret. We know judges. We know how to make things very difficult for young women who think they can take advantage. I'm 40 years old. You know what I mean." I did. I'd always known what she meant. Every dinner, every holiday, every carefully worded comment about my background and my people, and how Daniel could have done so much better. I'd known from our first meeting that Patricia Thorne saw me as a temporary obstacle, a phase her son was going through that would eventually resolve itself. She'd been waiting 12 years for the resolution. I suppose she thought death would provide it. "Leave your key on the table," I said. Patricia's face flickered. "I don't know what "The key Daniel gave you, for emergencies. Leave it." We're his parents. We have a right to— You have no rights here. None. Leave the key and leave. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Richard reached into his pocket, pulled out a small brass key, and threw it on my coffee table with more force than necessary. It clattered against the wood and skidded to a stop next to the ceramic vase from Portugal. "This isn't over," he said. "I know." They left. The door didn't quite slam. Patricia was too controlled for that. But it closed with a firmness that communicated everything she wanted to say. I stood in the middle of my living room, in the silence they'd left behind, and I felt my hands shaking, not from fear, from something else, something that had been locked away for a very long time. I met Daniel Thorne when I was 26 years old. This was at a gallery opening in Chelsea, one of those things where you're not sure if you're supposed to be looking at the art or the people looking at the art. I'd gone with a friend from work who disappeared within 15 minutes, leaving me alone with a glass of wine and a growing suspicion that I didn't belong there. He found me staring at a painting I didn't understand. It was mostly red, with some orange, and a shape in the corner that might have been a bird or might have been an accident. "Do you have any idea what it's supposed to be?" he asked. I turned. He was tall, with the kind of face that was handsome without being intimidating. Brown eyes, a slightly crooked nose, the beginnings of laugh lines around his mouth. "I've been standing here for 10 minutes, I admitted. "I think it might be angry." "The painting?" "The bird, if it's a bird." He tilted his head, considering. "I see it. Definitely angry. Probably had a bad day. Someone ate its worm." I laughed, a real laugh surprised out of me, and he smiled like that had been his goal all along. "Daniel," he said, extending his hand. "Margaret, Maggie, which do you prefer?" No one's ever asked me that before. Then I'm glad I did. He wasn't like the men I'd dated before. He wasn't trying to impress me with his job or his apartment or his opinions about wine. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He made fun of himself easily, naturally, when I told him I worked as a copy editor for a publishing company. He didn't make a joke about correcting his grammar or ask if I'd read anything important lately. He just nodded and said that sounded like the kind of job where you had to actually care about words. "I do care about words," I said, "maybe too much." "Is there such a thing?" We left the gallery together. We got coffee at a diner 3 blocks away, because neither of us could face the prospect of a cocktail bar. We talked until midnight, and then we talked some more, and when he finally put me in a cab, he asked if he could call me sometime in a way that made it clear he actually wanted to. "Yes," I said, "please." He called the next day, and the day after that, and by the end of the month, I understood that something was happening, something bigger than I'd expected. Something that felt like the beginning of a story I wanted to keep reading. I didn't know about his family then. Didn't know about the money, the expectations, the carefully maintained social position. Didn't know that Patricia Thorne had been planning her son's future since before he was born, and that I wasn't in any of the versions she'd imagined. By the time I found out, I was already in love, and by the time I understood what it would cost, it was too late to care. The lawyer called me 3 days after the incident with the Realtor. "Ms. Brennan, this is Michael Chen from Hartwell & Associates. I've been retained by Richard and Patricia Thorne regarding the estate of Daniel Thorne." I was in the kitchen when the phone rang, elbow deep in sudsy water because my dishwasher had chosen that week to give up the ghost. I dried my hands on a towel and sat down at the table, the same table where Daniel and I had eaten 1,000 breakfasts, where he'd told me about his diagnosis, where I'd fed him soup when he couldn't manage anything else. "Go on," I said. "My clients believe there may be irregularities in how your late husband's assets were distributed. Specifically, they have concerns about the property at 412 Ashford Lane, which they contend should have been included in Daniel's estate and subject to probate. The property is in my name. It's been in my name since we bought it. My clients are aware of that. However, they believe the arrangement may have been made under duress, or that your husband may not have fully understood the implications of—" Daniel was a financial analyst. He understood exactly what he was doing. A pause. I could hear papers shuffling on the other end of the line. "Ms. Brennan, I'm going to be direct with you. My clients are prepared to pursue this matter aggressively. They have resources, they have time, and they have a very strong emotional motivation. If you're open to a settlement, a reasonable division of assets that acknowledges the Thorne family's interest in their son's legacy, we could potentially resolve this without prolonged litigation. What kind of settlement? My clients are proposing a 60-40 split on the sale of the property. They would receive 60% in recognition of Daniel's family contributions to his financial success. You would retain 40%, which should be more than sufficient to establish yourself in a rental property of appropriate. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that, watching the light change through the windows, thinking about the word appropriate. Patricia loved that word, appropriate behavior, appropriate expectations, appropriate wives for her son. I'd never been appropriate, not in her eyes. My family was too small, just my mother and me, after my father left when I was 3. My education was too public, state school, student loans, years of paying them off. My ambitions were too modest. I didn't want to run a company or cure a disease or reshape the world. I just wanted a quiet life, meaningful work, someone to love. Daniel had given me all of that, and now his parents wanted to take back what they'd never owned in the first place. The thing Patricia never understood, the thing she couldn't understand because it would have required her to see me as a person instead of a problem, was that I had loved her son, really loved him. Not his family's money, not his connections, not the future she was so sure I was angling for. Just him, the man who laughed at his own bad jokes, the man who cried at dog food commercials, the man who held me every night and told me I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. When he got sick, it was sudden. One day he was fine, a little tired, maybe a little off, and the next day there was a mass on his scans, and a doctor using words like aggressive and advanced and we'll do everything we can. Pancreatic cancer, the worst kind, the kind that doesn't give you time. We had 8 months, 8 months of treatments that didn't work and hope that kept shrinking and conversations neither of us wanted to have. 8 months of watching the man I loved become someone I barely recognized. Gaunt, gray, fading. His parents visited twice. The first time was early, right after the diagnosis, when there was still talk of clinical trials and experimental treatments. Patricia swept in with flowers and cashmere blankets and suggestions about specialists in Switzerland. She talked a lot about fighting and staying positive and not giving up. She didn't ask Daniel what he wanted. She didn't ask how he was feeling. She told him how he should feel, and when he didn't feel that way, she seemed personally affronted. The second time was near the end. Daniel was in our bedroom by then, the hospital bed taking up the space where our dresser used to be. He couldn't eat, could barely speak. Patricia stood in the doorway, looking at her son like he was already a memory, and I saw her calculating, not grieving, calculating, adding up losses, assessing damage, planning her next move. She stayed for 45 minutes, then she said something about traffic and kissed Daniel's forehead and left. That was 3 weeks before he died. After they left, after the lawyer called, after the silence settled, I went into the basement. Daniel had used it as an office during the pandemic, when we were both working from home and space was tight. He'd set up a desk down there surrounded by filing cabinets and shelves of books and the kind of organized chaos that only made sense to him. After he died, I'd left it mostly untouched. Occasionally I'd go down to look for something, a document, a memory, proof that he'd existed, but I hadn't done a full excavation, hadn't been ready. Now I needed to know. The filing cabinet was locked, but I knew where Daniel kept the key, in a small wooden box on the top shelf, hidden behind a row of economics textbooks. He'd shown me once, years ago, and I'd forgotten until I needed to remember. Inside the cabinet, folders, dozens of them, labeled in Daniel's neat handwriting. Tax returns, insurance, investments, house documents. I pulled out the house file. It was thick. 11 years of paperwork, from the initial offer to the most recent property tax statement. I spread everything out on Daniel's desk and went through it piece by piece. The deed, dated 11 years ago, my name only. Margaret Rose Brennan, the mortgage documents, my name only, my signature, my income verification. The refinancing paperwork from 5 years ago, when we got a better rate, still my name only, Daniel's handwriting on a post-it note, stuck to the inside of the folder, in case anyone ever questions. You earned this. Love, I sat back in his chair and felt something ease in my chest. I'd known, of course. I'd always known. But seeing it laid out like this, the evidence of his intention, his care, his determination to protect me even then, made it real in a way that memory couldn't. He'd known his parents, he'd known what they would do, and he'd spent 11 years making sure they couldn't. The formal legal notice arrived a week later. It was thick, official, filled with language designed to intimidate. The Thorns were filing a claim against the estate of Daniel Richard Thorn, deceased. They were contesting the distribution of assets. They were requesting an immediate injunction preventing the sale, transfer, or modification of the property at 412 Ashford Lane. They were demanding full access to all financial records from the duration of the marriage. They were, in other words, trying to take my house. I called the lawyer I'd used for Daniel's will, a calm, competent woman named Sarah Okonkwo, who had walked me through the probate process with patience and clarity. "I've seen these cases before," she said, after I'd explained everything. "Grieving families, complicated dynamics, money they think they deserve. Usually it settles. The cost of fighting isn't worth what they might gain. What if I don't want to settle?" A pause. I could imagine her tilting her head, reconsidering me. "Then we fight, but you should know, the Thorns have resources. They can drag this out for years if they want to. Make your life miserable even if they never win. Sometimes the smart move is to offer something small, just to make them go away. And if I don't have anything small to offer, then we need to make sure our case is airtight. Every document, every record, every piece of evidence that proves the house was yours before, during, and after the marriage. If you have that, their case falls apart. If you don't—" "I have it," I said. "All of it." "Good. Then let's get to work." The next 2 months were consumed by paperwork. I dug through everything, not just the house documents, but all of it. Bank statements, tax returns, email archives, text messages, every record of every transaction, every conversation, every moment that might be relevant. What I found was both simpler and more complicated than I'd expected. Simpler because the house was clearly, indisputably mine. There was no ambiguity, no loophole, no legal toehold for the Thorns to exploit. More complicated because the deeper I dug, the more I understood about my husband's family. The more I saw the patterns I'd been ignoring for years. Daniel had been supporting them. Not substantially. He didn't have the kind of money his parents pretended to, but consistently. A few thousand here when Patricia mentioned a cash flow problem. A few thousand there when Richard's business deal fell through. A recurring monthly payment that I'd noticed on our bank statements but never questioned because Daniel had said it was for his retirement account. It wasn't a retirement account. It was a wire transfer to his parents. For 11 years, while Patricia was looking down her nose at my state school education and my modest ambitions, her son had been subsidizing her lifestyle, while Richard was making comments about Daniel's potential and how he could really go places if he wasn't held back. He'd been quietly accepting Daniel's money to cover the gaps between his image and his reality. And they had never thanked him, not once, not in any of the emails I found, not in any of the text messages, not in any of the handwritten cards they'd sent for birthdays and holidays. They took and took and took, and they treated it as their due, and they never for one moment considered that their son might have given them everything he could spare and still loved them anyway. I thought about telling Sarah, about using this information somehow, exposing them, making them see what they'd done. But what would be the point? They wouldn't see it as taking. They would see it as natural, appropriate, exactly what children owe their parents. They would find a way to make Daniel's generosity into my manipulation, his love into my control. Some battles can't be won with evidence. Some people can't be reached with truth. The hearing was scheduled for April. In the months leading up to it, I did what I could. I organized my documents. I met with Sarah. I prepared myself for the ordeal of seeing Patricia and Richard in a courtroom, of having my marriage dissected by strangers, of being forced to defend my right to the life I'd built. And I waited. The waiting was the hardest part. Not because I was afraid. I'd moved past fear somewhere in the basement, surrounded by Daniel's files, holding the post-it note he'd left for me, but because the uncertainty was corrosive. Every day that passed was a day I couldn't plan beyond, couldn't fully commit to, couldn't inhabit without the shadow of what might happen next. I stopped inviting people over, stopped making improvements to the house, stopped thinking about the future as something I could shape. I just existed, suspended, waiting for permission to live my own life. Patricia called me in March. I almost didn't answer. I'd programmed her number with a specific ringtone, something discordant and unpleasant, so I'd know to prepare myself before picking up. When I saw her name on the screen, my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. But something made me answer. Curiosity, maybe, or the exhaustion of avoidance. Margaret. Her voice was different, softer, controlled in a new way. I'm glad you picked up. What do you want, Patricia? I want to talk. Just us. No lawyers, no filings, no… She paused. No unpleasantness. I think we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd like the chance to correct that. You brought a realtor into my house without my permission and told me I should be renting. No, I know, and I'm sorry. I was upset, grieving. I wasn't thinking clearly. Losing Daniel, her voice cracked just slightly, just enough to sound real. You understand, don't you? You lost him too. I didn't say anything. I was trying to reconcile this Patricia with the one who'd stood in my living room 2 months ago, appraising my life like it was inventory. Let me take you to lunch, she said. Somewhere nice. We can talk about everything, the house, the lawsuit, our family. We don't have a family. Daniel was our family, and he's gone. That's not true. We're connected, Margaret. We'll always be connected. And I think if we could just sit down, face to face, we could find a way through this that doesn't hurt everyone. I should have said no. Every instinct I'd developed over 12 years was screaming at me to hang up, to protect myself, to remember who this woman was and what she was capable of. But I was tired, and there was a small, stubborn part of me that still wanted to believe things could be different, that people could change, that maybe, the grief had genuinely broken something loose in her, made her see what she'd never been willing to see before. Fine, I said. Lunch, tomorrow. You pick the place. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you. I'll text you the details. She chose a restaurant in the city, expensive, quiet, the kind of place where serious conversations happened over white tablecloths and small portions. I took the train in wearing one of the nice outfits I hadn't touched since Daniel's memorial service. I felt like I was costuming myself for a performance, but I wasn't sure which role I was supposed to play. Patricia was already there when I arrived. She stood when she saw me, embraced me briefly. Her perfume was the same, that distinctive floral scent I'd always associated with judgment, and gestured to the seat across from her. You look well, she said. Healthy? Thank you. The house agrees with you, I suppose. All that space. I waited. She was building to something. I could feel it. I've been thinking a lot, she said, after we'd ordered. About Daniel, about the kind of son he was. The kind of husband. She paused. We never appreciated you, Margaret. I never appreciated you. The way you took care of him at the end. I couldn't have done it. I wasn't strong enough. You could have been there more. She flinched. Just barely, just enough. I know I should have been. I was… She looked down at her napkin, pleated it between her fingers. I was afraid of watching him suffer, of being useless. It's not an excuse, just the truth. I didn't know what to say. I'd never heard Patricia admit to being afraid of anything. The lawsuit, she continued, was a mistake. Richard pushed for it, he was angry, and when Richard gets angry, he needs someone to blame. I should have stopped him. I should have protected you, the way Daniel would have wanted. Instead, I made everything worse. So drop it. I want to put all of this behind us and move forward. But Richard, she sighed. Richard isn't ready to let go. He needs something, some acknowledgement that Daniel mattered to this family, that his legacy means something. His legacy is the life we built, the memories, the love. That's not something you can quantify or divide. I know that, but Richard doesn't speak that language. He needs… She hesitated. Something tangible. There it was, the pivot, the redirection. I'd been waiting for it, and here it was, wrapped in apology and understanding. What are you asking for, Patricia? Just a small amount, a gesture, enough to make Richard feel like we haven't been forgotten. She named a figure. It was significant. Not enough to ruin me, but enough to hurt. I know it's a lot, but if you could consider it as a way of honoring Daniel's memory, honoring his family. I looked at her across the table, at her careful makeup and her expensive clothes and her soft, reasonable expression. I thought about how long it must have taken her to practice this. The vulnerability, the admissions, the strategic placement of truth and manipulation. No, I said. Margaret, You don't get to apologize your way into my bank account. You don't get to use Daniel's memory as a crowbar. The answer is no. It will always be no. And if you contact me again before the hearing, I'll tell my lawyer to request sanctions. I stood up, left money for my untouched salad, walked out of the restaurant without looking back. I was shaking by the time I reached the train station, not from fear, from something else, from the strange, terrible clarity of finally seeing someone exactly as they were. The hearing was on a Tuesday. I arrived early, my documents organized in a binder Sarah had helped me prepare. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, less imposing, more bureaucratic. It looked like a place where small dramas played out every day, where lives were rearranged by people who would forget the details by dinner time. Patricia and Richard were already there, sitting with their lawyer at a table on the other side of the room. Patricia was wearing black, as if for a funeral. Richard looked older than I remembered, his face carrying a weight that might have been grief or might have been the strain of his own schemes. They didn't look at me when I came in. The judge was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and tired eyes. She listened to both sides with the patient expression of someone who had heard every variation of the story before. The Thorns' lawyer went first. He talked about family, about legacy, about the natural expectation that a son's assets would pass to his parents in the absence of children. He talked about the unusual circumstances of the house being in my name only, implying without quite saying that I must have manipulated Daniel somehow. He talked about the grief of parents who had lost their only child and now faced the additional cruelty of being shut out of his memory. Then Sarah stood up. She didn't talk about emotion. She talked about facts. The deed in my name, dated before the Thorns' claim of any financial contribution. The mortgage, the refinancing, the property taxes, all documented, all clear. Daniel's will, witnessed by 2 independent parties, explicitly leaving everything to me. The absence of any evidence suggesting undue influence, coercion, or lack of capacity. The petitioners have provided no documentation to support their claims, Sarah said. They have offered speculation, implication, and grief. None of these constitute a legal basis for overturning 11 years of clear property records. The judge asked questions. She asked the Thorns' lawyer to provide evidence of their financial contributions to the house. He couldn't. She asked him to explain the legal basis for challenging a will that had already been through probate. He cited case law. That didn't apply. She asked him to address the timeline. The house purchased 3 years after the marriage, the wife's name on every document from the beginning. He couldn't explain it, because there was nothing to explain. The house was mine. It had always been mine. And no amount of family grievance could change that. In the matter of Thorn v. Brennan, the judge said, after a brief recess, I find no merit in the petitioner's claims. The property at 412 Ashford Lane is clearly and unambiguously owned by Ms. Margaret Brennan. The petition is dismissed. Petitioners will be responsible for their own legal fees. She said more after that, procedural language, legal formalities, but I stopped listening. I was looking at Patricia and Richard, watching their faces as the reality sank in. Patricia was staring straight ahead, her expression frozen. Richard's jaw was working, the muscles jumping under his skin. Neither of them looked at me. Sarah touched my arm. Maggie, it's over. I know, I said, but it didn't feel over. It felt like something had cracked open, and I didn't know yet what would spill out. I didn't see my in-laws again after that. Sarah handled the follow-up, the final paperwork, the confirmation that the case was closed. She told me the Thorns had considered an appeal but decided against it. Whether that was because their lawyer advised them they had no case, or because they'd simply run out of energy for the fight, I never found out. I went home to Ashford Lane. I stood in my living room, uncontested, mine, and I waited to feel something. Relief, maybe, triumph, justice served. What I felt was empty, not sad exactly, just hollow, like I'd been holding my breath for months, and now that I could exhale, I didn't remember how. The house was quiet. It had always been quiet, really. Even when Daniel was here, we weren't noisy people. We read in the evenings, talked softly, moved through our routines with the gentle predictability of long partnership. But this quiet was different. This quiet had weight. I started noticing things I'd been ignoring. The draft in the upstairs bathroom, the creak on the 3rd stair, the way the afternoon light came through the kitchen window and lit up the empty chair where Daniel used to sit. The house was full of absences, Every room contained the ghost of something that had been, something that had ended. I'd been so focused on fighting for my right to stay that I hadn't asked myself whether staying was what I wanted. Sarah called me a few weeks after the hearing. "I wanted to let you know," she said. "We've received some information about the thorns that you might find relevant." I was in the backyard under the Japanese maple. The buds were just starting to form, those first hints of the red that would come. "What kind of information?" "It seems your husband's financial support to his parents was more substantial than the records you found, and it stopped, obviously, when he passed. Without that income, they've been struggling." "Struggling how?" "Their accountant reached out to me. I think they were hoping for some kind of informal arrangement, maybe a resumption of the payments. I told them there was no basis for that. But I thought you should know their situation. I thought about this, about Patricia's expensive clothes and Richard's business deals and the whole elaborate performance of their lives. They're broke?" "Not quite, but close. The house in Westchester is mortgaged to the hilt. The business investments never paid off. They've been living on credit and Daniel's help for years." I didn't know how to feel about this. I'd imagined them as wealthy, powerful, untouchable. I'd spent 12 years feeling small in their presence, feeling like I was the one who didn't belong. And now I was learning that their whole world was built on foundations as shaky as mine had ever been. "Is that why they wanted my house?" "I think so. They saw it as the last asset they could reach, the last thing they were owed." "But they weren't owed anything." "No, they weren't." I thanked Sarah, hung up, sat under the tree for a long time, watching the light change. I thought about calling them. I thought about reaching out one last time to say, what? That I was sorry? I wasn't sorry. That I understood? I wasn't sure I did. What I kept coming back to was Daniel. What he would have wanted. How he would have navigated this if our positions were reversed. Daniel had loved his parents. Not blindly. He knew who they were, knew their flaws, their failures. But he'd loved them anyway. He'd supported them because he felt responsible, because family meant something to him, because he couldn't stand to watch them fall even when they were pulling him down with them. That kind of love isn't healthy. I know that. It's tangled up with obligation and guilt and the deep-rooted belief that your worth is measured by how much you sacrifice. Daniel had carried that weight his whole life, and in the end, it had helped kill him. All that stress, all that pressure, all those years of being the foundation for people who never thanked him for it. But it was also who he was. His generosity, his loyalty, his stubborn commitment to the people he loved. I couldn't separate the good parts from the damaging parts. They were all woven together, inseparable. If Daniel were here, he would have found a way to help them. He would have figured out a solution that let everyone save face, that kept the family together, that preserved some fragile version of peace. But Daniel wasn't here, and I wasn't him. I wasn't obligated to be him. Spring turned into summer. The Japanese maple leafed out fully, its canopy throwing dappled shade across the backyard. I started a garden, nothing ambitious, just some tomatoes and basil and a few flowers I didn't know the names of. I learned to enjoy the quiet instead of just enduring it. My friend Keiko came to visit one weekend. We'd worked together years ago, before I'd switched careers, before Daniel, before everything. She was one of those people who always showed up when you needed her, even when you didn't know you needed her. "It's a beautiful house," she said, standing on the porch with a glass of iced tea. "You can feel the love in it." "Yeah." I looked at the windows, the garden, the life I'd fought to keep. "We put a lot into it." "Are you happy here?" The question surprised me, not because it was complicated, but because no one had asked it before. Everyone wanted to know if I was okay, if I was managing, if I was healing. No one had asked if I was happy. "I don't know," I said. "I think I'm still figuring out what happy means. Without him." Keiko nodded. She didn't try to fill the silence with platitudes. That was what I'd always liked about her. "You know," she said finally, "you don't have to stay here. Not because of them. I know you won the case. But just because you can sell it, move somewhere new, start fresh." "I know. But you're staying." "For now." I looked at the garden I'd planted, the vegetables just starting to show above the soil. "I think I need to stay until I know I'm staying because I want to, not because I have something to prove. And then we'll see." The Thorns filed for bankruptcy in August. I heard about it through Sarah, who heard about it through legal channels, who heard about it because apparently the Thorns had listed me as a potential creditor in some desperate attempt to claim money I didn't owe them. It won't go anywhere, Sarah assured me. There's no basis for it. I think they're just flailing at this point. I imagined Patricia signing the paperwork, seeing her life reduced to numbers and debts and the cold bureaucracy of financial failure. I imagined Richard watching his self-image crumble, all those years of pretending to be something he wasn't finally catching up with him. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired. I decided to write them a letter, not because I wanted to reach out, not because I thought it would change anything, but because I had words inside me that needed somewhere to go, and they'd been sitting there for too long. I sat at Daniel's desk in the basement, my desk now, I supposed, and I wrote, Patricia and Richard, I heard about the bankruptcy. I'm sorry. Not for the outcome. I think you earned that through your own choices, but for the fear and uncertainty you must be feeling. I know what it's like to have the future you expected disappear. I want to be clear about something. I did not take your son from you. I did not manipulate him or control him or steal what should have been yours. Daniel chose me. Every day of our marriage, he chose me. Not because I forced him to, but because he loved me, and I loved him, and that was enough. I know you never approved of me. I know you thought he could have done better. But here's what I've learned about your son. He was better because of who he was, not who he was with. His kindness, his integrity, his endless capacity for love, those were his, not mine. I just got to witness them. He would have helped you if he were still here. He would have found a way. That's the kind of person he was. Too generous, too loyal, too willing to sacrifice himself for people who didn't deserve it. I'm not him. I won't be sending you money. I won't be reaching out to repair what was never whole. I'm not your family, and you're not mine. But I do hope you find whatever piece is available to you. I hope the loss of everything you thought mattered helps you see what actually does. I hope you remember your son for who he was, not what he could do for you. I hope you learn to live with what you've become. Margaret. I read it over twice. Then I folded it, put it in an envelope, and dropped it in the trash. Some letters aren't meant to be sent. Some words are just for you. Fall came. The Japanese maple turned fire red, just like it did every year. I sat on the back porch and watched the leaves drift down. And I thought about time. How strange it is, how it keeps moving even when you're not ready. How it heals without asking permission. A year since Daniel died. More than a year since I'd spoken to his parents. Months since the lawsuit, since the hearing, since any of it. I was still here, still in the house, still figuring out what came next. The garden had produced more tomatoes than I knew what to do with. I'd given them to neighbors, made sauce, eaten them warm from the vine with salt and nothing else. There was something grounding about growing things. Something that reminded me I was still alive, still connected to the world, still capable of nurturing something even when I felt empty. Keiko visited again. Other friends came too, people I'd lost touch with during the years of caretaking and grief, slowly finding their way back. The house started to feel less like a museum and more like a home again. One day in October, I woke up and realized I wasn't dreading the day, wasn't just getting through it, wasn't counting the hours until I could go back to sleep. I was just awake, present, here. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was something quieter than that. Something I didn't have a word for yet. I saw Patricia once more, about a year after the bankruptcy. It was accidental. We were both at the same grocery store, of all places. I was in the produce section choosing apples. She was at the end of the aisle, staring at a display of oranges like they held the secrets of the universe. She looked different, older. Her clothes were still expensive, but they hung on her differently. Less like armor, more like costume. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the lines around her eyes, the pallor of her skin. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The gentle music piped through the speakers, all the ordinary trappings of ordinary life. Then she turned and walked away. No acknowledgement, no confrontation, no final words. Just a woman in a grocery store, choosing not to engage. I went back to my apples, picked 3 good ones, paid at the register, drove home. That was it. The last time I saw her. The last moment of whatever we had been to each other, adversaries, strangers, the two women who had loved the same man in very different ways. I still live in the house on Ashford Lane. It's been 3 years now. 3 years since Daniel died, 2 since the lawsuit, 1 since I saw Patricia in that grocery store. Time keeps moving, and I keep moving with it. I've made changes, painted the bedroom a different color, something lighter, something that doesn't remind me of hospital rooms. Replaced the couch where I slept all those nights. Added a reading nook by the window that looks out over the garden. The house feels like mine now. Not ours, not anymore, just mine. A place where I've lived a life, where I've grieved and healed and started over. A place where the memories are still present but no longer suffocating. I don't know what happened to Patricia and Richard. I stopped asking, stopped caring. They exist somewhere in the world, living whatever life they've managed to build from the wreckage. I hope they found some version of peace. I hope they didn't. I hope all kinds of things, depending on the day. What I know is that they don't live here. They never did. This house was never theirs to claim. Sometimes, late at night, I walk through the rooms with the lights off. I know this house so well now. Every creak, every shadow, every corner where the moonlight pools. I know which floorboards to avoid if I don't want to wake myself up. I know how the walls sound when the wind blows a certain way. It's mine, all of it. The good and the bad and the ordinary in between. I fought for it. Not because I needed to prove anything, not because I was trying to punish anyone, but because it mattered to me. Because Daniel put my name on that deed for a reason. Because some things are worth defending, even when the cost is high. I don't know what comes next. I don't have a plan, a trajectory, a clear picture of the future. I have a house and a garden and some friends, and the slow, patient work of building a life I didn't expect. It's enough. For now, it's enough. The last thing I want to say is about Daniel, not about his parents or the lawsuit or any of the ugliness that came after. Just about him. He was kind, really genuinely kind. Not as a performance, not to get something, but because that's who he was. He remembered people's birthdays and asked about their problems and showed up when he said he would. He believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard, even when no one was watching. He loved me. I know some people doubted that. His parents certainly did. But I never did. I felt it every day, in the small things and the big things and all the moments in between. He loved me, and I loved him. And for 11 years, that love was the foundation of everything. He's gone now, has been for a long time. But the love isn't gone. That's the thing about love. It doesn't disappear when the person does. It changes shape, finds new containers, settles into the corners of your life like light through a window. I carry him with me, in the house, in the garden, in the quiet evenings when the maple tree throws shadows across the lawn. I carry him in the choices I make and the person I'm becoming. His parents wanted something from his death, some acknowledgement, some payout, some final proof that he had belonged to them. But Daniel didn't belong to anyone. He belonged to himself, and he chose to share that self with me, with the house, with the life we built together. That's his legacy. Not money, not property, not the things that can be counted and divided. Just love. Stubborn, impractical, impossible love. It was always enough. The light is different in autumn. I'm sitting on the back porch, watching the Japanese maple do its annual transformation. Red edging into orange, orange edging into gold. In a few weeks, the leaves will fall, and the branches will be bare, and the tree will look dead, even though it isn't. It's just waiting, resting, getting ready for what comes next. I think about that a lot these days, about the seasons of things, about how nothing stays the same, and how that's not always a tragedy, about the strange comfort of knowing that change is coming, whether you're ready or not. My phone buzzes, a text from Keiko. Dinner this weekend. I found a new Thai place. I smile, type back, I'm in. The sun is setting, turning everything golden. The house behind me is warm, solid, full of the life I've built inside it. I don't know what comes next. That's okay. I'm not afraid of not knowing anymore. I'm just here, in my house, in my life, in whatever comes after grief, after fighting, after winning a battle I never asked for. Here, it's enough.